Also, with playlisting becoming a thing, I just think that the avenues of promotion have really widened now and aren't concentrated.
What is up? Going live. So yeah, how's it going? History. So yeah, I'm gonna go over a few things today. I like this one. So yeah, I just want to talk a little bit today about Israel and Palestine. So I was watching this right here, and I noticed a few things, and I want to just correct a few things in this discussion with Destiny and Dylan Burns.
Hello. Hey, Destiny, how's it going? Great. How are you going? I'm going fine. I'm going on straight and narrow. I'm on God's path. Amen. Cool. Blessed be thy name. So
First of all, fuck God. I don't care about that. Nobody cares about God.
I heard you were talking about Israel Palestine. I mean a little bit. What's your take generally? It's really hard to have a general take. I don't know the. I wish that they could just like fucking all grow up and live happily together and stuff.
It's not hard to have a general take on this. I just needed somewhere to start from this perspective because there's nowhere to really go from here because there's two different sides to this. You have the weak and the strong. You have the invaders and the invaded. You have you have different elements of this, and it is a complicated issue. However, you have the conquerors, and then you have the ones being conquered. And Israel is the one who is conquering. Israel is the invader here. So you have to understand anything that Hamas does is in defense. So you have to realize that there are people that there's the way the world works is on a dichotomy of power. And if there was no Hamas, and of course it's not right to bomb different countries, I mean, different places, but you have to understand it is, if there was no Hamas, Hamas was involved in aiding and giving Palestinians food in Gaza because they have sanctions on the whole country. And Hamas was the ones who freaking had pipelines, underground pipelines, um, feeding people in Gaza. And, you know, of course, the mainstream media didn't put it this way. This is the problem with the way the world is perceived is you have one side that is always trying to take over the other side, and they use this various form of propaganda as a way to influence certain countries to be on that side that they're on. So they created this narrative that terrorists are the ones causing the problems, and we know this is not, in fact, the truth, because terrorist in this way is used as a propaganda term, and it is used to create the enemy. So if Hamas wasn't there and Palestinians just didn't defend themselves, then they would just completely not exist. They would be kicked out and just be taken advantage of. And conservatives are always telling you that they're always saying that you need to fight back. You know, they're always telling the refugees, you need to fight back. You need to, if you love your country, don't go to another country. Try to stay here and save it. However, whenever something happens in these countries, then they always call them terrorists when they fight back. So it's just very misconstrued.
We're gonna fuck each other over so much, but
I don't know.
so your take is like a peace on earth, everybody get along, basically.
Yeah, please stop being so cringe.
Stop being cringe.
Yeah, obviously that is the take. However, you cannot just say that. You cannot just expect one race of people just to sit back and take it and not say anything about what's happening. Because if that happens, then they would just not have any type of political power or leverage. So people do not even understand any of the nuances of this situation here. Come on.
Big cringe. Can't people just not be fucking cringe? Who cares where your particular holy man came from or your fucking families of generational bullshit? All right, fucking load.
It's not about what religion you are. These type of issues are more based around the geopolitical efforts that are happening. The nuances of these arguments is based on the economic sanctions that are placed on certain countries, and the narrative. It's less about religion and it's more about the, international politics of the situation. Now, don't get me wrong, it still is about the religion as well. But religion is a way all religion is basically, is a way to control people, and it's a way to manipulate things to seem like you are the one who is in power and in charge. The tools that people use, to manipulate and to gain power are from religion. You can get this. There are people who study the Bible and they are somewhat manipulating other people. Because if you study the Bible or the Quran, then you're going to understand how much it is not correct and how immoral it is. Not even just immoral, and it's just something that should be studied, in my opinion. However, it's something that shouldn't be taken seriously. It should be spirituality. I think society should be more spiritual in certain aspects. I'm not an atheist. However, I do not like Abrahamic religion. And I think that it has been, a bad... Well, it's not all bad. It could be studied. And there are some verses in the Bible and the Quran that, you could learn a lot of things from, such as Psalms. And you can get a lot of positivity from the Bible, which I think is fine. However, it does not take away from the fact that religion is used as a tool of propaganda by the state. It is used as a way to gain power, and is used to make people less suspecting of, your true intentions. If you ever notice, if you find someone who is really religious and Christian and wears certain type of necklaces and crosses, then you can almost assume that they will have ulterior motives with, their intentions, because they will use religion as a way to deceive people, to making them not be as critical of them. So essentially, politics, especially in the West, have used, religion as this, way to manipulate people into essentially believing that their intentions are pure. However, they're running all of these PR campaigns. They were making the president, like, you have to look at this from an outside perspective, like you don't live in the West. You have to see it from other people's perspective. And sometimes you should try leaving your own country to see different perspectives, okay? Like, you have to get outside of your own little box, your reality tunnel. There are forces controlling this world and power, people with power, and they're creating these narratives, okay? They're creating these narratives to influence people. And they want to tell you that there is different political narratives they can use. One is called bait and switch. Look that up. You can find out what bait and switch is. You create problems and then create the solution to the problem. Everything that in politics is basically goes back to being about money. Okay? So you have to understand, and then the president of the Western presidents will be go out and take pictures as a form of propaganda to make them, especially they'll go out and try to associate themselves with, like, children, or doing nice things and make them be perceived as this nice, people, but they're really not. So in this instance, I do believe the media is, in the West, is obviously tilted towards Israel, because I do think it is a little bit of racism. Israel people, Jewish people are more white than Arab people in Palestine. So all they say is, oh, a lot of times, well, people are waking up to it now, but a lot of times they're just like, oh, we are just going to create this narrative or whatever, and they're trying to create this narrative to where they influence other people's opinions on things.
Would have some old school RuneScape, make an account, go.
Comment. Have I heard of a guy named Jeff Durbin? He's a Christian and can at least make arguments whether you agree or not. At least from some of the stuff I've seen of him anyways. No, I've never heard of that guy, but I will more than gladly check him out. I'm not, like I said, I'm not anti-religion. I'm not anti-spirituality. I think spirituality is a good thing. And I'm not some type of person who just looks at Christians as less than human in certain ways. But I do think there is a certain element of manipulation going there that needs to be, pointed out. And if you can be Christian and make good arguments and, at least acknowledge how things are working and be the manipulations of the media, then I think that's fine. But I do ultimately think that, religion is a form of, like, manipulation and control. That's what I'm saying. I don't care if people are spiritual. I think it's fine. However, somebody has to come out and say this stuff. So
fucking farm, okay, or go to school, get a job, do some dumb shit, be a citizen of the world. Okay? Be a
Yeah.
noble.
Just this is the problem with the world. Just go to school, get a job. Obviously you can tell that Destiny is being somewhat passive aggressive in this, and Destiny is not someone to take seriously. But I do think he does have some good arguments the way he talks and argues, and he is not very smart, but he tries to come across as smart. But there's no point of living in this life, this world. There's no point of going to school and getting a job. You know what I'm saying? Like, the reason why this society is held together is because of people just doing what they think they should do. So obviously he's just saying this in a passive aggressive way.
Let's be based, okay?
You can tell that's sarcasm.
You know what? Maybe that's what they need. They need less cringe. So, what factions do you think are cringe? You think Hamas is cringe? You think Islamic
Hamas
Jihad is
is
cringe?
ultra cringe.
Ultra?
Okay. Yes. However, the Israeli government also a little bit cringe.
Little bit.
A little bit cringe, yeah. Basically just all the people there are cringe.
What do you think of Benjamin Netanyahu, Destiny?
Well, he lost the elections, right? So he is out soon.
I wish I followed as near as I could, but it's complicated. We don't know for sure what's going to happen, but apparently, I think some Arab party. There's questions about Arab parties and what's going to be happening going forward. I don't want to say anything definitive because I don't know for sure.
Okay, gotcha. My understanding is he's out. I mean, like, he's obviously. I mean, like, when you ask me, like, what is your opinion on Netanyahu? You're basically asking me, like, do I think does Israel have a right to kick all the Palestinians out of fucking Israel? It's kind of the question. I don't. It's really I don't know what the right answer is. I don't. I really don't. What do you think?
I mean, my position is. So the thing is, obviously, I've actually avoided for the last year and 5 months while I've been streaming to ever talk about Israel Palestine, because I know that no matter what I say, I'm gonna get like an angry reaction from somebody, and also like depending on what you say.
This guy has no backbone. I mean, he's a very smart guy. I think he's very smart, Dylan. This guy, but however, you cannot deny that he has no backbone in this conversation. He's totally, cowarding to Destiny's, influence and trying to get on his good side, which I understand. I mean, it's kind of hard to conversate with these people, but it has no backbone. Simply worried more about what people are going to think of him than saying his actual truth. And this is the problem with the streaming community, and this is why I've started my channel to point this shit out. But yeah, what do you mean? Just say what you think. There's no reason to just go on and on about what you think people are gonna think. You know what I'm saying? Stand for something or fall for anything.
And this is a legitimate concern for me. It can affect who exactly would be wanting to hire me going forward if I work in the foreign policy sphere, because this is an extremely divisive issue, and a lot of people make
What do you know? This is obviously the streaming is for him just an ends to a means to an end.
Not divisive at all if you're in the U.S. If you're in the U.S.,
True.
you toe the Israeli line 1,000,000%, and there are no other options. But go ahead.
I will just say for myself personally, I believe that, and I got some shit for calling them evictions, so I'll put evictions in air quotes. The evictions that are going on in East Jerusalem, I think they're pretty screwed up. I think that the large amount of force that was used against Palestinian protesters that were outside of the third holiest site in Islam was extremely disproportionate, and you can just look at the injury reports, like over 300,000 for 300 injured compared to 3 Israeli security forces. I think maybe a dozen Israeli Jews.
It always is, by the way.
It always is
disproportionately. Israel is always able to.
And this has been a problem for such a long time because the media is always reported as the Jews are the ones who are the right ones, and the Islamic people are the ones who are wrong. But they don't tend to report on the damages that Israel does, but they will always report on the damage that the Muslim people do. So yeah, you have to watch out for this. You know, yeah, it's just that the modern left really, like, people on the far right, don't like the far left, and the left. But however, the left calls out Israel much more than the right does. So it seems like that is somewhat of a issue there.
Kill way more Palestinians than like, again, just being descriptive. I'm not taking a side, but like on one end you've got people from Gaza lobbing over these shit ass rockets that are being intercepted by this fucking multi-billion-dollar anti-missile.
You have to understand that neo-Nazis are looking at Israel as this place that they cannot stand as well, and that's a whole another issue that, I'm gonna have to go into that issue. I don't know if I'll do it now, but it's very important to understand that it's a lot of political narratives here. So yeah,
defense program, and then the retaliation for that is scrambling like fucking fighter jets to do these like precision airstrikes and shit on Gaza.
I don't think the Hamas Air Force of balloons with grenades like taped to them.
Oh yeah, the balloons of the fight, where like I think only one of them even managed to strike like even.
And
I think
it
was like a remotely populated village.
Yeah.
Did it? Oh, okay. I knew that one was like it. Like, I think only one of those like found like any type of like valuable target. I say valuable target, but it was like a car in a town or something.
Yeah. I think that I think this moment showed a lot of weakness in Netanyahu due to the fact that when he banned access to the Temple Mount, which is it's like the same thing, but it's like for, I don't know how to say it, but it's like the same thing but for Jews. It's like a really important site for them. It's literally like the same location. There's been this long-standing policy of Jews cannot pray at the time. It's complicated, but anyway, he banned like access to it on Jerusalem Day, which is the anniversary of the 1967 victory of Israel in defense of the Israeli state. Blah blah blah.
Yeah, which is seen as like kind of like a big like buff like Israel citizen moment. We're like, yeah, fuck everybody, like we can do our shit. Like I think it's considered like relatively antagonistic towards Palestinians that live in East Jerusalem.
Extremely, because the thing is, a lot of these number one, the Israel Day marches are usually organized by pretty far right Israeli groups a lot of times, and they'll specifically choose to march through like pretty like heavily Palestinian communities in East Jerusalem, and so it's,
this time they wanted to march through the actual, I don't remember the name of it, the actual neighborhood where they were going to do these evictions at. They were planning
it was
on
extremely provocative. And so the government basically said, like, yeah, man, this is a little too much for us. And a lot of the far-right allies that Benjamin Netanyahu helped get elected to Knesset basically turned around and started spitting in his face. Like, you are basically saying you are seceding, you are caving to terrorists. That's what you're doing today. And so he got a massive L. Obviously, like Hamas's missile strikes, Islamic Jihad's missile strikes, any missile strikes, terrible, should be condemned. Obviously, the Gaza, but again, the disproportionate level of force here is so overwhelming when you see like the missiles. I think maybe one person might have died as of now. I saw one report showing that, but before yesterday, it was one person was injured. It was followed up by a IDF airstrike that I know it killed Hamas members, but it also ended up killing. The original reports from the Gaza Ministry of Health said 9 children out of 20 was the original figure. I don't know if that number's been updated or not. But obviously, I don't know if this is a controversial take, but I think blowing up kids is bad.
Kind of. To be fair on that, though, and this is something I've read about extension in the past, because this gets thrown a lot. I'm pretty sure Hamas do actually stage shit outside of like schools and hospitals and stuff, with the stated goal of like, listen, if they blow fucking hospitals and kids up, it makes our side look way better. Hamas is very intentional when they do that. Not to say that Israel should return fire and kill fucking kids and all that.
Like,
that's horrible.
I understand that, but this is the thing for me is this justification could be used to justify basically like large scale firebombing, could be used to justify large scale bombing of a lot of places. For example, the Russians were very famous for during the Syrian War for bombing hospitals and bombing civilians. If you look at death tolls from any respectable institution that's actually logging like how many deaths happened in the Syrian civil war, the overwhelming amount of deaths are due to the Syrian military, as in the Syrian Arab Army, and the Russian military bombing campaigns and indiscriminate attacks. And the defense they always use is, well, the terrorists, they use civilian shields. But then you look at the footage and it's like they're just straight up bombing hospitals, right?
Sure.
And so it's hard for me to just see like children blowing up and just hear the defense of like, well, you know, that there was a terrorist behind that child and take that for justification. I mean, I remember people dunking on Joe Biden like a few months ago when he did the strike in Syria. And as far as we know, it originally the reports was there was a different strike that he was going to do, but then called off once they were
Once
in the
again,
vicinity, and everybody.
all this is correct. However, they're not really doing a very good job at addressing the root of the problem. See, this is the problem with politics and Western, leftist politics especially. They never address the root of the problem. And the root of the problem, this is a symptom of the problem. However, the root of the problem in most terms, most instances is, Christianity, and it is religion, it is economics, and I do believe mostly is capitalism. Not just saying that as like some liberal thing to say, but I mean, the reason for this is because they're invading these countries trying to get their oil. Initially, America had invaded Saudi Arabia and, had a lot of these, deals with the Saudi Arabians. Hello? Hey. That's pretty good. Yeah. Hey, can I call you back? Okay, bye.
Was laughing at him, like, oh, this is something that needs to be applauded, right? And then you fast forward to now, and we see the results of what happens. You don't do that. Is that when?
Well,
for me,
it's not the U.S.
No, not we, but okay.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the general alliance. Yeah, I shouldn't say we,
I understand that.
but when the Israeli government doesn't do that, that's the result. Because for me, a personal standard is if there's civilians in that vicinity, the general rule should be abort. That should be the general rule.
Yeah, kind of, but then obviously Hamas plays into that, right? So,
right, yeah, Hamas does play into that. I mean, obviously Hamas does play into that. So it's a hard. I'm just gonna stick by the general rule though that if you need to do your best, and when you end up,
I understand that.
You
I understand
when you end up bombing and killing civilians, ultimately a lot of the blame is at your feet.
Sure, I understand that, but then on the other side, on the Israeli side, you literally have people that are lobbing rockets over into like your cities and stuff, or attempting to. So like,
yeah, but you also need to remember that these rockets, when you look at comparative damage to like Israeli strikes, are not at all comparable. When the amount of damage, the defenses that the Israeli government has made available. Now there is a question of like, do they have to respond proportionably? No, but when you have the ability to choose if you can or if how proportionate or how overwhelming your response is going to be, then I think you can make that decision to we're not going to bomb this because there's civilian casualties, and when you fuck up and you kill civilian casualty, that's on you.
Yeah, and I can understand that, but we have to keep in mind too that like imagine it's easy for us as U.S. people to sit and say this because I don't deal with any shit like this. I don't know where you live. I don't have bombs shot at me ever. I don't think I've ever experienced it in my life. And it's probably true for 99% of people listening. But like, I can't imagine like how politically viable it would be to just like sit by and have like people lobbing rockets at you, and you're just like, well, we're not going to respond because we think that'd be the wrong thing to do. Like, I feel like you'd be losing elections.
I understand a response.
Farther and farther right leaning people that would just start taking office over and over again. Yeah,
I understand that.
Yeah, I'm not pro-Jew, so.
Just like there should be a response to.
And I'm not really a liberal or a leftist.
States. But if that response ends up killing
I don't know,
civilians, ultimately,
I really don't like liberals, to be honest.
Ultimately,
so,
we have to place the blame somewhere, and the blame, I think, in large part, has to go on the person who pulls the trigger and ends up killing civilians.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It just doesn't work here.
My whole point of
Hamas is going to exclusively be launching attacks out of this. So like your prescription
my whole point of
Israel should never respond.
Putting this shit out here is to like call out liberals.
The thing is, I believe
an argument because
suck,
I believe it suffers much damage, but like
I believe that I do believe that there's other ways to respond than direct airstrikes.
like
for example,
how?
like Israel has one of the most intelligence and I'm supposed to say intelligent services in the world. They have used like a lot of, for example, I think assassinations, something a lot more strategic, actual.
Yeah, but doesn't Israel, even when Israel does like the targeted, I wish I could remember this. I want to say this happened. It was a big deal a while ago. Didn't Israel like drone strike like a guy getting out of a car in was it Gaza or the West Bank? And then like I think like one civilian died during this, but I want to say it was a relatively high-ranking target. But even in that, people were like incredibly.
This is a pretty shitty stream, though. I'll tell you that.
It might have been in Iran though, not in Palestine. But, like even when the targeted attacks are used, one, these are a lot harder to set up, I would imagine, and probably take a lot more time. And then yeah, I don't know. It's I want to agree that like civilians should always be left alone. But like, just I think that like the real world application, I think it's like
I understand.
Really
I understand
difficult.
that like we understand that civilians are like end war civilians die. That is a thing that happens, right? That's why war should generally be avoided. The problem is, to be able to hand wave civilian casualties under the definition, well, our opponents don't care about civilians, that they use them as shields, leads to basically the justification where you can basically stand there and any amount of civilian casualties can basically be justified under the pretense that, well, our opponents are bad guys, it's all of our opponents' fault. And if you look at the justification they're doing right now, that's it. It's all Hamas, fuck Hamas, it's their fault. Their fault that civilians are dying. And the thing is, this justification has been extended to justify basically everything. A great example would be when there was protests at the border or at the gates, and Israeli snipers would literally shoot Palestinian children. They would say, it was Hamas that organized it. It was Fatah that organized it. It was Palestinian Islamic Jihad that organized it. Therefore, they organized the protest. They organized the stone throwing. Therefore, it's their fault, even though they're the one who sniped a child in the head or ended up crippling people and shooting them in the legs. They would use that justification to justify any amount of force because the opponents they're working with are perfectly willing to put Palestinians in the firing line.
Sure, but I mean, like, so, like, a very pro-Zionist or whatever, like, explanation might be that with enough pressure applied, maybe the Palestinian people throw out Hamas.
Once again, once again,
why hasn't it worked?
This isn't the issue. This is not the issue here. Hamas is not the problem. Israel is the problem. Hamas is just responding to, is just a symptom of this issue. They're just simply saying that they want to exist, and they have, these countries have to build armies, okay? Like, you have to understand, if you don't have an army, and if you don't have, a way to protect yourself, then you're going to get invaded, by an invading country. A Western country, usually America, Britain, France, they're all invading countries. And so you have to have your military to be able to survive. And that the main reason, the biggest threat to world peace, honestly, is, Western military. In the West, they're going to tell you, like, oh, well, we just need to protect ourselves. We need to have the best military. However, the main thing is that smaller countries, less powerful countries, have to be able to protect themselves from being invaded. So Hamas, they're not innocent. They they're in response of, the Jewish Israeli state invading their country, you know.
Because obviously, I mean, if we look at the Egyptian and Israel-backed blockade, we look at the bombing campaign, we look at the large-scale expansion of Israeli settlements, we look at everything that's happened. All it's really done a lot of times in my
two-state solution. I don't know, man. I really don't know. I think that, yeah, probably. I mean, at this point, a two-state solution is probably the best, option here. That the best option would have been to not put Hamas. I mean, not to bring Israel into existence. Obviously, well, I don't know. I don't really like saying what my real solution is, but like, as far as this video goes, yes, definitely you need a two-state solution. However, I do not like Israel. I think it shouldn't exist. So really, two-state solution at the very least. But, my ultimate end goal would be to end end Israel completely, just get rid of Israel. Personally, but I know that'll never happen. So I think logically and realistically, two-state solution would probably be the best thing to happen.
My opinion is pushed the Palestinian people closer into the arms of these organizations, because what they ultimately can say is, hey, remember how we told you how we can't negotiate with Israel? You remember how we told you in our charter how evil this group is and that group is? Boom, there's the evidence right there. 9 dead kids.
Yeah, of course, people play this up all the time, right? People in Syria were doing this as well, right? With the chemical weapon attacks and everything too, for like recruiting people to either side, right? Whether you were blaming Assad for it or any of the more moderate rebel groups, yeah. I don't know what the I understand. I'm empathetic to your point. I'm just not comfortable telling a country like, listen, I know people are throwing rockets at you, but you literally just need to sit there and like do nothing about it and live with it. Like I think it's a really hard situation.
I mean, this is a pretty good point right here. I mean, he does have a few good points every now and then. Like, you have to think. I mean, obviously, it's a very obvious thing. Yeah, of course, you don't want to get bombed, and you're not just going to sit there and let, the terrorists bomb you. Obviously, or not terrorists, but the Palestinians to bomb you. That's not really the issue. Obviously, everyone knows that already. It's very common sense, very basic opinion, that doesn't even really matter. Obviously, you're going to want to protect your own people. However, the main issue here was, the way that the Palestinians are being treated and the way that they're being oppressed, and this whole narrative that's been created, in this way, and
It's the reason why Israel-Palestine has its own almost its own standard of complicated issues, because it is an extremely complicated issue. My problem is I just want to be like, I think we need to be careful when we talk about like specifically the civilian casualties that happen here, because we need to first acknowledge how disproportionate it is. It's the same reason why.
I wonder how long I'll be on Twitch before they realize that I'm like not pro the Israeli state. I wonder if like Twitch is like super hardcore pro Israel and they just want to like, only support like obvious things that people say, but they're not really, they're probably not. It's like the problem in online streaming, especially, is like people are not really free to say their true thoughts. They're not allowed to say their real opinions because, they're so afraid. And someone has to come out and say this, but obviously whenever someone does, then they get banned and they don't exist anymore. So this is the essential problem to Western media. I mean, it's basically controlled. It's basically not free. It's basically, controlled by the corporations and this whole pro-Israel, pro-West narrative, different forms of propaganda. So you have to understand people are not truly free to say what they really think, which I think people should be. There's no reason to be dishonest, just so you can make your fans happy and make more money. I mean, the more real you are, these days, the more money you can make, because you have to realize that reality is going to unfold in a way that eventually the common narrative is going to run out. It's going to die. And there's not going to be any type of new information. So what's happening now is what you're seeing is the slow transformation away from common narrative. So people like me, people that are free thinkers, can come to the front line, and the free thinkers will be the new narrative. So this is why it's so important to get this knowledge out there, not essentially just random people like this that are streaming, just trying to make money and doing things like that. Because eventually, the words that people say, the narratives, essentially everything goes back to essentially how much dopamine is created in the brain. And for there to be new amounts of dopamine created, there needs to be new information. There needs to be new content created. That's why society is always pushing itself forward, which is both good and bad. But there needs to be a new narrative. So now the common narrative is being taken away, and the truth will finally be the next common narrative. And then hopefully this is the idea of entering the age, into new age. Some people say the age of Aquarius. Right now we live in, they say that, Kali Yuga, which is essentially, these are much deeper problems that are existing, I believe, on a spiritual realm. However, it's just hard to explain, really.
Right now,
It's like,
there is nothing wrong with what Andrew Yang said. Period.
Yeah,
There's nothing
and
wrong
to be
with what he
clear,
said.
Andrew Yang is probably getting a lot of shit online. If I had to guess,
yeah.
I think.
And then another example of a cut grifter is, Andrew Yang. This guy, he's just going to this agreeing with this Jewish narrative, of course, and because he lives in New York and he knows this will help him in New York because there's a high Jewish population there, and they're about to address that, which is pretty cool. Noticing that, I mean, Andrew Yang, I did like him at one time, but however, when I figured out the truth about Andrew Yang, he is not very good. He's full of crap, and basically is just trying to get attention, trying to, say a bunch of things just to get attention, and just aren't really saying anything of actual value. Typical. It's pretty much every ruler and politician does that. I mean, people are just living in this world as peasants, and they're just listening to these lying sociopaths, and every single one of them is wrong. Every single politician, pretty much that ever has existed, has been wrong, in my opinion, because the actual idea of being a politician is not balanced in power. It's more about gaining power. It's more about keeping control and gaining power. And that's a very basic way to understand it, too, as well. I understand that. It's not just power. To be on the front line of understanding that, you have to understand the language of power, the art of war, the unseen thing that exists in this world in reality that is not really easy to explain, but it's it's easier to perceive. So I found that very interesting to look at. But I'm always interested in stuff like that. But you have to realize that power is a language, and all politics exist on the language of power. So every politician is somewhat wrong. Not even saying like
Oh no,
Pretty
he's gonna be
fucking safe.
like
supporting,
the thing
like,
is, in
anarchy
New
or
York
anything. I'm
City,
just
it
saying,
means
like,
literally nothing. Number one, it's a mayoral race. Foreign
people
policy,
that
nobody's really gonna
are
care.
in power
And
wrong.
nobody cares about foreign policy really a lot of times on the national level, and you're gonna get them to care on the mayoral level. And number two, New York City has an extremely powerful,
Yeah, true.
when I say
Yeah.
powerful,
I
I
already
mean
know that.
the left, right?
Yeah,
It is
exactly.
you're leaving
And
out
then
a huge chunk of the violence.
yeah, and even the U.S. State Department, is similar, where it's like the
Oh my god!
Palestinian attacks, or they what?
Did you see the State Department official getting grilled on this?
Well,
On the idea of Palestinian
No,
self-defense.
I saw that, but to be fair, I wouldn't expect him to give any other answer on anything because, and you know what? I'm actually so much more empathetic now, having been a streamer, because I see how clip chimped everything gets, and reporters are truly the original clip chimpers, okay? Because you're trying to get like a quote from this guy, basically saying, because they're asking him over again, do you think that states have a right to self-defense? And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, I think any state has a right to, we agree generally. Do you think that, wait, but do you mean only states? Or do you, because Palestine...
Was the original question state, or was it Israel has a right to self-defense? And then he said states, and then he said, and then he responded to the
I think that in
states.
general he was saying it, but he wasn't trying to right. They're looking for like a quote from him, right? But the obvious answer is that the United States isn't going to stake out like a huge position on Palestine because Israel isn't willing to stake out like a huge position on Palestine. Real quick, what we were saying before though is that like the problem with the State Department is coming out really strong against the against like Hamas's attacks into Israel. You talk about leaving out context. It's kind of shitty when you ignore the fact that like Palestinians like constantly have like an existential crisis in East Jerusalem is like a shitty thing for the State Department to just kind of leave that out, because it makes it look like the Hamas attacks are like out of nowhere, like, oh well, they're them wacky Palestinians again just bombing Israel for no reason.
Yeah, because the thing is, the reason why that question was so interesting, right, is because when you oops, accidentally wrote something else. Okay, is the thing is when anytime like something happens with Israel, Palestine, and any missile ever goes over, the first thing you hear is right to self-defense, right? Right to self-defense is usually the immediate thing you're going to hear, that the state of Israel has the right to defend itself. But then, with that logic, that makes sense, but wouldn't that same logic apply the other way? And I don't think a lot of people, and I don't even blame a lot of people for having thought about this, because this is something even I haven't probably put forward to myself, because it's just not something I hear a lot. It's not a narrative that I hear questioned. Well, okay. Well, then do Palestinians have a right to self-defense? And what does a right to self-defense for Palestinians look like? Is that armed militia groups? Is that is that a response to an airstrike? Like, what exactly does that mean?
It's more complicated because Israeli aggression against Palestinians is more subtle than Hamas's like counterattacks, right? Like, because it seems weird to say like you should be able to violently defend yourself from evictions, right? Is that right? Like, it's a lot more muddied. Whereas on the Israeli side, they're like, look, they're launching rockets at us, like fuck them, right? So like Israelis have like the better optic.
People don't see the tension turning slowly up on one side, like a broiler, until boom, there's an explosion, and that's the missile strikes that ends up hitting a car or terrorizing the city, and then a response that's a military response that's much more destructive, much more deadly, kills a lot more people, ends up killing kids, and if anything, that just makes the situation, of course, worse. And then you have like a whole bunch of missile strikes, and then groups like Islamic Jihad or Hamas then can turn to the crowd and say, "See how right we were. See, we're the only ones fighting them out of everybody else. All these other groups, all the political solution, Abbas and Fatah."
Anyways, we all get the point here. The main point is that God is appeal to the common norms. He is, the ultimate narcissist and figure of false power and ultimate false prophet. And, by embracing Satan, we can come to know the gnosis of truth and, the gnosis of rebellion, Satan, Lucifer. We can understand that this world, the mundane world, God is the definition of the mundane world, okay? So we have to realize, like, you're accepting mundanity and Christianity and Abrahamic religion, Muslim religion altogether is the definition of, fake. And by accepting the darker forces of this world, you can, come to terms with your own, nature, your own rebellious nature. You do not have to adhere to mainstream society anymore, which is not even really the point. But, stop trying, if you're out there, like, stop trying to appeal to what people want you to say. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Yeah, whenever someone says the Arabs need to go back to the Arabian Peninsula, Arabs invaded North Africa, I just would ignore that person. I mean, don't really care. Just tell them that you don't